grinder, and from the colour of the sparks I'd say it's pretty hard from the way it cut. So I'm hoping that today we'll forge it into a spearhead. At the moment we just hope to flatten out one end a little so that I can grip it reliably with a pair of bowl grips or pliers. So I'm going to have a go.
Right. Okay.
What's my aim, apart from to flatten it? Just to flatten it.
For now, just to flatten it at the point more than anything, I think. Well, that's what we're going to do at the other side. Just flatten it. Can you hold it?
Yes. I'm going to try like that.
Do you want the spearhead and the point how long?
I want a great big flat spearhead that's flat for most of its length.
Long one then?
Yeah.
Can you hold it?
Yeah. When I first started today, I was using my left hand because I have tendinitis and I thought I'd be kind to my right arm. And then I thought, sod that. This is the arm that can do it. So, I'll suffer later. But now I can use it. That's cold, isn't it?
It's cold now, yeah. It's just a bit more, just tuck it there. Just get it flat.
You hold it again for save the transfer, save time.
Working more up the middle, I think. Right.
Staying in the middle.
Yeah, it's warm now.
I should stay in the middle of the anvil and let you go back and forth because you're much wiser about
It's really
receiving the heat.
If you handle it, it's much easier, I think. Really, you tend to hit where you want to strike and where the angle. Once you get used to it, and you bring it about. I see people work like that, and it's often when they're building a big sword, two people with big hammers and one guy holding the piece, and he's just going. Out this way, that way, and they're just hitting in the same place.
They're like a trip hammer.
But it's...
He's doing it really, they're just hammer men.
How to just do stuff.
Isn't it?
Maybe since I've got my arms and actually does something about it.
Yeah. It's so gratifying, isn't it?
It is when you get... I made that knife, and I thought I'd never stop. But, I mean, this is what this is.
I really need to sort this out.
It's looking good. It's coming nice and flat. Straight, constant. Double-sided?
Yeah. My mental image.
Right, well, let's do this first. Okay.
Go on.
We'll fasten it to a flat bar and we'll put the back on there.
Okay.
I've got my sandwiches for everybody.
Can I still claim to have forged it if I do that?
Yeah, it's what it's
Okay.
well.
That's all I care about.
Your choice.
As long as I'm within the letter of the law.
Your choice.
Well mate,
I mean,
I don't know if my...
it's a traditional tool that's always been used.
Yeah!
The difference is I haven't got a huge stone one run by ponies.
Yeah!
I've got
A Saxon angle grinder.
a small one on there. Yeah, they used to have big stone wheels to carve their blades, edges.
They bloody did. They didn't sit there and forge it out to a perfect fine edge on every spear.
Yeah, and tell you what, it looks better for you doing it by yourself.
I'll learn more. But I'll learn more slowly.
You what?
I said I suppose I'll learn more, but I'll learn more slowly.
No, but yeah, it's looking better than before, definitely. It looks a lot more flat hammered, not so wrinkled.
Still pretty horrible. But I think it's time to go back in the fire.
When you're getting close to your shape
Yeah.
and your thickness, be very careful with your hammer blows and how flat they are and how gentle.
Yeah,
You don't want
okay.
any deep nicks if you want to
Right.
get it out.
Right, yeah, I've got a lot of correction to do actually where already I've been careless, very careless. I've got leading edges everywhere. Right, okay, I'll watch that.
Modern machine work in CNC in live 24/7.
Oh, your blade's looking so pretty.
Is it hot?
Oh, is it hot?
That's what you don't want. Crack.
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 With the forging over, I've picked up the grinder and started trying to put some sort of shape and edge onto this thing. The shape I had in mind wasn't this one. I pictured myself making an assegai. I didn't realise how slender the blade would be. I've also tried to define a point where, when viewed from the side, the edge stops and becomes a blade. I've never tried to do this before, and I've, as you can see, a long way to go. This is how far I've come so far with the grinder. I've put this black marker pen here to remind me where to stop grinding my biface. There's a definite biface there. I think I should stop using the grinder at this point and give way to a file. The other problem I've noticed is that this shaft, which was dead straight when I started whacking it with a hammer, is now bent. It isn't going to fit in the hole I'm going to bore in my spear haft. So I'm going to have to snip that off with a cutting disc. Here's the blade. It looks alright at first glance, but there is a bit of a problem. Somehow I've created these inward curves here, and they are going to cause a weakness. I need to reinforce them. Thankfully I can reinforce this area by putting the crossguard across it. To make a crossguard, I've got this. This is the result of a brass pour gone wrong. I didn't get the material up to a temperature. Here's a bit that didn't even melt, and when I withdrew the crucible from the furnace, the brass solidified before I could even pour it. So I can cut a chunk off this and use it to make a crossguard for my blade. I reckon I need to cut off a chunk about 18 or 20 millimeters thick. As for the shape of the crossguard, I was thinking of something simple that would offer the necessary reinforcement and also protect the user's hand from the blade. I've been carving away at this crossguard with a small grinder, drilled a series of holes, and now I need to make a brooch to join all those holes together and give the profile of a very, very flattened rhombus, like the blade. So here's my first failed crossguard, which I made too narrow. I can add it to the end of the tang, suitably trimmed down of course, because it's no longer actually a crossguard. So I think what I need to do is cut it to about that length. All of which means that what I need to do is get myself a piece of steel the same thickness as the tang and cut out a piece of that steel shaped like the shaded area here. Here I've cut out that shape in paper and then drawn round it to transfer it to this sheet of steel. Here it is welded on. I've cleaned up the welds. This illustrates the fact that there is a difference between a welder and a man who owns a welding machine. I fear I am and will always be just the latter. I've cut down the other crossguard to use as a pommel. It seems to me that there are only really two things left to do. Make a handle and heat treat the blade. I'm going to make a handle first, but to do that I need to go to my climate controlled, carefully tended wood collection. Let's see what we've got. I know this bit, it's fooled me before. It looks like an interesting piece of wood, but on closer inspection it proves to be ply. Now this, however, I know this piece of wood. I've used this before to make real wooden grip panels to replace the plastic ones on this replica Mauser. Now that I've selected my piece of wood, I'm going to make a couple of templates by tracing the outline that I've sketched here of the handle. Having cut out the template and drawn round it twice onto my piece of wood, I'm going to cut out the pieces. Looks odd, doesn't it, with the blade so much shorter than the handle. Still, it's a discreet dagger. Now I need to round off these side scales. I've started rounding them off a little bit and got rid of that nasty factory finish. I'll keep going until they're rounded off, and then I need to hollow out the inside of each scale to accommodate the tang. These fit comfortably around the tang now, and they don't leave a gap in between them. They close up completely all the way along. Which means it's pretty much time to heat treat the blade. Okay, the plan is to heat the blade until it's very red, about 850 Celsius. Let it cool and watch it. When the straw colour reaches the edge, I plunge it into this hot water. Right. And there's the quench. Let's see how it looks. Well, there it is. I hope I've hardened it satisfactorily. I'll clean it up and then we'll put a file on it and see how different it is. Okay, what I've done since I last switched off the camera is sandpaper this thing until my fingers really hurt, and I stopped and had a cup of tea and then went back and did it till they really hurt again. It still looks terrible if you look at it with a discerning eye, but it's my first ever forged knife and it's been made entirely from scrap, so I'm not too bothered, except by them. I'd love to get rid of them, but I've rubbed them and they just won't go. I should have done all this more thoroughly before I hardened the blade. Okay, let's start thinking about assembling this thing. let's have a quick dry run. First, the crossguard. Next, the side scales. These I hollowed out too deeply, and I fixed that by gluing a strip of veneer into the base of each one. So with those in place, the last thing we need is the pommel. About there. I'll get it lined up and clamp it off camera. It's glued. I think it's pretty straight. There's no need to clamp it. I just have to wait for the epoxy to go off and then clean up. The crossguard's on and seems to be reasonably straight. Before I glue on the side scales, I'm going to use my Dremel to cut a few narrow grooves into each side of the tang, because at the moment, apart from the imperfections left by my appalling welding, there isn't much for the epoxy to grab hold of. There's not much key for the epoxy on the steel. I used up one Dremel disc on each side trying to cut my grooves into the tang, but I seem to have inadvertently hardened the tang as well. So I'm just going to use loads of epoxy and clamp it thoroughly. Alright, I'm going to get some clamps on this off camera. I think it's going to be easier for me to finish the wood if I do that before I glue on the pommel. And as I'd like to make this dagger entirely out of materials that I already had at home, I'm not going to be using any bought wood stain. Instead, I've been on YouTube and found that you can stain wood a good colour using either watered down acrylic paint or, believe it or not, coffee, which gives a finish apparently rather like that of walnut. I've tried both. Here are my test pieces. This is finished in watered down acrylic, and this is stained walnut with coffee. I prefer the coffee, so that's what I'm going to be using today. Compared to many daggers that I've seen, this one has a relatively short and narrow blade. When I first made the crossguard, I failed to consider that. I made the crossguard intending that the scales would completely fill up all that brass and the handle would be much fatter. Then when I was drawing this, I realised that if I did it like that, the handle would overwhelm the blade. So I made them skinnier. I began to regret that, and I wondered whether just to take a grinder and grind away this wood and make fatter scales. In the end, I decided to stop work overnight and think about it, which is what I did, and I decided that yes, it would look absurd with a big fat handle and this tiny blade. So I'm going to leave the side scales as they are and carry on with the staining. Let's see. Stain. Right, I'm going to try a teaspoon of instant coffee, small quantity of water, it's supposed to take 2 or 3 applications to get the right shade, which is allegedly that of walnut. Here's a real piece of walnut so that we can compare the shade that we get. I had to fill a nick which I made with the Dremel, so I'll be interested to see how that looks with the stain. I think we're going to get a darker initial result. Right, here comes the nick. Bit disappointing. Still staring white. Okay, as I started to say before, I think it'll lighten up as it dries, and we've a fair way to go before we start to approach the colour of walnut. This is the second coat wet, and this is it now that it's dry. Let's keep going. Before I apply a third coat, I'm going to hit this nick with a bit of brown acrylic. Okay, I didn't like the brown acrylic, so I mixed up a mixture of brown and black, which I hope now looks like a natural flaw in the wood. I think one more coat and I'll be happy. Stuff really works. It certainly isn't yet the same colour as this particular piece of walnut, but I'm sure the shade of walnut varies from piece to piece. I suspect this will be the last coat. The question is, do I want to lacquer the handle? I'm not sure I want it to look varnished, but I don't want coffee smelling hands every time I pick the thing up. So here's the finished shade. I've decided to give this one very, very thin coat of matte finish lacquer, basically to seal in the faint, very faint smell of coffee. And after that it'll be time to glue on the pommel. Good old Rust-Oleum, crystal clear, seals, protects, enhances, and most importantly, it has a matte finish. That's all it gets. Now the last piece of the puzzle is to glue on the pommel. I'm just going to use this stuff. I need to wipe off this excess right away so it's reasonably clean all the way round. Okay, the pommel is glued firmly in place, and I flooded most of the cavity with epoxy and finished it off with a skim of filler. I'm going to try hitting the filler with some gold paint. It's not the best solution, but we'll see how it looks when it's dry. This is the first knife I ever made. A one-piece aluminium casting. This is the second, a cast-bladed dirk, which uses the same piece of old wood for the handle as our dagger. And here's the third knife I ever made. I'm quite pleased with it, given that it's made from a shaft I found in a computer, some melted down bath taps, and a piece of wood that I found lying by the side of the road. Will it pass the paper test? Well, if it were any other sort of knife, I would now be sharpening it and gleefully slicing a piece of A4 into ribbons with the best of them. But this is a dagger, and I had to ask myself, why would I sharpen it? I have no intention of ever using it. In fact, this is going to end up hanging on the wall next to my spear. So there's no need for it to be sharp. And in fact, I'd rather it weren't, as it makes it safer to handle. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you like the dagger. Thanks for watching.